You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin. Rick, you need to come home. Right now. I had just pulled into the gas station on Highway 19 when my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Jenkins, my 80-something neighbor back in Greenville. The kind of woman who still baked pies for the 4th of July and always had binoculars near her window. Just in case. Mrs. Jenkins, is everything okay? She hesitated, like she was trying to decide how much to say. I saw 2 men go into your house. Jessica's there. I felt my heart jolt, like someone had slapped me across the chest. 2 men? That's right, she said, her voice lower now. And it's not the first time I've seen them. Thought maybe they were relatives or something before. But this time I saw one of them grab her around the waist. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. My ears were ringing, like the rest of the world had just gone silent, except for her voice. I looked down at my hand and realized I was squeezing the gas nozzle so hard it had started to shake. I'm sorry to call, Rick, she continued gently, but you needed to know. I managed a shaky breath. Thank you, I'm on my way. I tossed the nozzle back in place and jumped into my truck. The keys were already in the ignition, and I didn't even check the mirror as I peeled out of the lot. The only thought pounding through my skull was Jessica, my wife, my best friend since college, and 2 men in my house. A cold pressure tightened in my chest. I wasn't the suspicious type. Jessica had always been sweet, maybe a little distant lately, but I figured it was just life stuff. We both worked a lot. People grow apart sometimes. But this wasn't distance. This was betrayal. The tires screeched as I turned down Oak Hollow Drive. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Neat lawns, mailboxes with flags down. Nothing out of place. But everything felt wrong. I spotted Mrs. Jenkins waving me down from her front steps. Her face was pale, eyes wide. They're still inside, she said. I didn't see them leave. My palms were slick with sweat as I nodded and headed toward her porch. My heart thundered in my chest. I didn't know what I was about to walk into. But I was going to find out. By the time I got to my front yard, Mike was already there. He leaned against his black SUV parked a few houses down, arms crossed, eyes scanning the house like a cop on a stakeout. Which made sense. He used to be one. 20 years on the Greenville PD before he retired early, said he was tired of chasing junkies and covering up for bad brass. He was my best friend and the first person I called after Mrs. Jenkins. You ready? He asked, his voice steady. Not really, I muttered, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. But I'm not walking away. He nodded once, already in game mode. I'll take the side door. You go through the front. We block off any exits in case they try to bolt. Got it. I checked my phone for the time, just past 5 p.m. Still daylight. You sure you don't want to call the cops? Mike's jaw tightened. If they're just friends, you'll look like a paranoid husband. If they're not, he trailed off. Then this is personal, and you should be the one to find out. I didn't say anything, just gave him a look of thanks and headed for the front door. I walked up slowly, careful not to make the porch creak. My pulse was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. I put my ear against the door. Nothing. Then I stepped back, took a breath, and eased it open. Voices, laughter. I slipped inside and shut the door quietly behind me. The smell of roasted chicken and red wine hit me in the face. Music was playing softly. That Spotify jazz playlist Jessica always used when she was pretending to be fancy. I moved through the hallway, each step heavy. The closer I got, the clearer the voices became. I swear Rick would never notice, said a man's voice, smooth and smug. Jessica laughed. He doesn't. That's the problem. And then another voice chimed in. A different guy. You sure you want to keep this going? I turned the corner and stopped dead. There they were. Jessica, seated at the dining room table, like it was just a regular night. Across from her, 2 men I didn't recognize, both clean-cut, both casually dressed, sipping wine like they owned the place. Jessica looked up, and her smile dropped the second she saw me. Oh, she said, blinking. You're home early. Not really, I said, voice flat. Funny how no one told me we were hosting guests. The guy on the right raised an eyebrow. You must be Rick. I ignored him, eyes on Jessica. You want to tell me what's going on here? Jessica stood up slowly, brushing invisible crumbs off her pants. Rick, calm down. These are just friends. You're blowing this out of proportion. Friends? I glanced at the wine glasses, the half-eaten dinner, the candle. You sure about that? She rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. Don't make this into something it's not. The second guy leaned back in his chair. If it's a bad time, we can go. Yeah, I snapped. I think it is. And that was when Mike entered through the kitchen. The air shifted, the mood changed, and suddenly no one was smiling. The taller of the two men stood up, trying to look calm, but he had that twitchy energy, the kind you see right before someone does something stupid. Look, man, he said, raising both hands like I had a gun pointed at him. We're not trying to cause trouble. You walked in at the wrong time, that's all. I stared at him. You're in my house, with my wife, at my dinner table. I think I walked in right on time. Jessica crossed her arms and let out a breathy laugh, like I was being ridiculous. Rick, stop with the dramatics. You're acting like I cheated on you in the middle of the living room. Mike stepped further into the room, his presence alone enough to make both men tense up. You boys want to explain what you're doing here? Mike asked, voice low and calm. Because from where I'm standing, this looks real bad. The second guy, shorter, with slicked back hair and a mouth that looked like it never shut up, gave a little smirk. We're friends, just visiting. You guys ever hear of casual company? I hear of boundaries, Mike said, and this ain't casual. Now, why don't you two go ahead and get out before we have a real problem? The taller one glanced at Jessica like he was waiting for a signal. She gave a slight nod, and he turned to me. We'll leave. He moved toward the door, the other guy trailing behind, still wearing that smug grin like this was all some hilarious misunderstanding. I stepped aside, but followed them with my eyes. Don't come back. The shorter one gave a mocking salute as they walked out. Message received, officer. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed was thick and ugly. Jessica didn't look ashamed, not embarrassed, just annoyed. Happy now? She asked, arms still crossed. No, I said. Not even close. Who the hell were they? Does it matter? She snapped. You made your little scene. You chased them out like a jealous teenager. Congratulations. I stared at her, stunned. Are you seriously defending this? They're my friends, Rick. Friends who actually make me feel like a person instead of a housemaid or some background character in your life. My chest tightened. Jessica walked to the sink and poured out her wine. I've been miserable for years, and you've been too wrapped up in your own little world to even notice. So, instead of talking to me, I said, you let strangers into our home? She turned around, eyes sharp. Better than trying to talk to a man who stopped listening 5 years ago. And just like that, I realized this wasn't about the two men. This was about everything. Everything I didn't know had already been falling apart. Jessica didn't stop. Not even for a breath. You want to act like some wounded saint? Go ahead, she said, brushing past me. But let's not pretend you've been the perfect husband. I followed her into the kitchen, trying to keep my voice steady. Then tell me, Jessica. Say it. Tell me what I did to deserve this. She turned fast, her eyes flashing. You were predictable, safe, boring, Rick. Every single day was the same. You get up, go to work, come home, stare at the TV, eat dinner like you're on a schedule. There was no passion, no fire, just this routine. I blinked at her, like maybe I hadn't heard right. You're mad at me for being stable? She laughed bitterly. I'm mad at you for thinking that's enough. You stopped trying years ago, Rick. You come home in the same shirts, tell the same stories, and call it a marriage. You haven't looked at me, really looked at me, in years. That's not true, I said, but my voice didn't even sound convincing to my own ears. She leaned on the counter and shook her head. You didn't want a wife. You wanted a permanent roommate who would cook and clean and smile when your friends came over. I'm not her, Rick. I never was. I stood there for a second, not sure what to say. Then I whispered, you could have told me. I did, 100 times, but you don't hear anything unless it comes in the form of a paycheck or a to-do list. Something in me cracked then. I don't know what it was. Pride, maybe. The illusion that things could still be fixed, that this was just a phase, a bump, a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. This was the end. She had already made peace with that. I was the one standing in the wreckage, still hoping I could build something from the ashes. I stepped back and looked around the kitchen, the same space where we'd shared late-night popcorn, where I taught her how to make chili, where we laughed over burnt toast and spilled coffee. Now it just felt cold. "I gave you everything I could," I said quietly, "and it wasn't enough." Jessica's voice softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was pity. "No, Rick. You gave me the version of you that was safe, but I needed more than safe. I needed someone who saw me." "I see you," I said. "No," she whispered. "You see the idea of me, not the real me." Mike stepped in from the hallway then, looking at both of us. "Rick, let's go." I nodded slowly, my chest so tight it felt hard to breathe. I walked past Jessica without another word, the weight of everything pressing down on me. As I stepped outside, I felt the cold evening air hit my face. It didn't help. Nothing did. I wasn't just walking away from my wife. I was walking away from a life I didn't recognize anymore. The next morning, I was still sleeping on Mike's couch when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, no words, just a picture. Jessica, wrapped around a man I didn't recognize, smiling, holding hands like they were on a date. A beach in the background. Her head tilted toward his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. It took me a minute to breathe. Mike walked in with 2 mugs of coffee. One look at my face, and he knew something was wrong. I turned the screen toward him without saying a word. "Damn," he muttered, setting the coffee down. "She's not even trying to hide it." I stared at the photo. Something in my chest went hollow. That's not even one of the guys from last night. Mike sat down across from me. "She's been doing this a while, Rick. This wasn't just one bad night. This was planned." The thought hit me like a hammer. All those nights she worked late. All the unexplained weekends. The way she used to smile less and pick more fights. "I was such an idiot," I said quietly. "No," Mike replied. "You trusted her. That's not the same thing." I nodded slowly, but the truth was setting in. She had checked out of our marriage long before I had even noticed. I'd been sleeping next to a stranger for months. I took a long breath. "I need to do something." "Yeah," Mike said, leaning forward. "You need to talk to a lawyer." That night, I started the process. I canceled the joint credit card, froze our shared bank accounts, called a family lawyer in town, and scheduled an appointment. My hands were still shaking as I gave the receptionist the details. Marriage length, no kids, shared property, signs of infidelity. Mike sat nearby through it all, silent, just being there. That meant more than anything. By noon the next day, I had a file folder started. Financial records, screenshots, dates, passwords. I didn't know what I was doing exactly, but it felt like taking back control. Later that afternoon, I sat with Mike on his porch. The breeze warm, the street quiet. We hadn't said much in a while. I stared at the sky and finally spoke. "She moved on like I was a broken appliance," I said. "Just tossed me out and plugged in someone new." Mike took a sip of his beer. "You can either let that break you, or you can let it wake you up." I looked at him. "And if I want to do both?" He nodded. "Then do both. But don't stay stuck there." I stared out across the street. For the first time since this all started, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak, something clearer. I stood up and took a deep breath. "She doesn't get to have any more of me." Mike looked up. "That a promise?" "Yeah," I said. "It is." It was 2 days later when Mrs. Jenkins called again. "Rick," she said, her voice tight, "you need to come back. She's out front with movers." I felt the air leave my lungs. "She's what?" "She's got a big rental truck in the driveway," she said. "I saw her handing boxes to 2 men. They're loading up furniture. It looked like your recliner just went into the back." I didn't even say goodbye. I hung up and called Mike. 10 minutes later, we were in his truck heading toward my house. My fists were clenched the whole way. "She's not even divorced yet," I muttered, "and she's already gutting the place." Mike glanced over. "You froze the accounts, right?" "Yeah." "Then she's not doing this for money," he said. "She's doing it to screw with your head." He wasn't wrong, and somehow that made it worse. When we pulled up to the house, I saw the moving truck parked sideways in the driveway like it owned the place. 2 guys were carrying my old dresser down the front steps, sweat pouring down their backs. Jessica stood on the porch with her arms crossed, barking orders like she was the damn foreman of a job site. I got out of the truck and walked straight toward her. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. She didn't flinch. "Taking what's mine? You don't live here anymore." "I still have keys," she said with a shrug. "That means it's still partly mine." Mike stepped in beside me, arms folded. "Only until the divorce is filed. You try to sell any of this, you're going to have a legal mess on your hands." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Half of everything's mine anyway. I'm just getting a head start." I pointed to the truck. "That's my grandfather's dresser, my tools. You think I'm going to let you walk off with all of it?" She stepped down onto the lawn. "Rick, don't be dramatic. I gave you years of my life. I deserve something." "You deserve a lawyer," I said, my voice flat, "because that's who you'll be dealing with next." One of the movers came up, looking nervous. "Ma'am, this guy says he owns all the stuff. We didn't sign anything about disputed property." Jessica spun toward him. "It's fine. Keep loading." Mike stepped forward. "No, it's not fine. You keep loading and you're an accomplice. You want to get dragged into a civil suit over someone else's crap?" The guy paled. "Yeah, we'll just wait in the truck." Jessica stared at me, jaw clenched. "You're really going to make this ugly, huh?" "You made it ugly when you brought strangers into my house," I said. "You made it uglier when you started stealing." She looked me up and down like she was trying to decide whether I was bluffing. "I'll see you in court," she snapped, then turned and stormed toward the truck. The movers began quietly unloading everything they had just packed. Mike and I stood there watching. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like war, the kind where nothing gets won, only lost slower. "She's not done," I said. "No," Mike agreed, "but neither are you." 3 nights later, Mike and I were on his back porch, nursing cold beers and mostly just sitting in silence. The kind of silence that only comes after your life's been turned upside down. The space where words just don't do much anymore. Then a car pulled up in the driveway. I stood. Mike was already halfway to the door. A few seconds later, we were face to face with someone I hadn't expected to see again. One of the guys from the dining room, the shorter one, slick hair, smug grin. Except now the grin was gone. He looked tired, maybe even a little nervous. "You got a lot of nerve showing up here," I said. "I know," he said, hands up. "Look, I wouldn't come if it wasn't important." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You here to return the wine glasses or what?" The guy shifted uncomfortably. "My name's Chris. I didn't know she was married when we met. I didn't know what I was stepping into." I crossed my arms. "And now you do?" He nodded. "More than I wanted. Look, man, I'm not here to apologize. I'm here because she used me, just like she used everyone else." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black flash drive. He held it out. "What is it?" I asked, not moving. "Proof," he said. "Bank statements, screenshots, audio recordings, stuff she didn't think I'd keep." Mike stepped forward and took it from him. "You recorded her?" "She didn't know," Chris said. "She'd leave her emails open on my laptop. She talked openly around me. She never thought I'd turn on her." "And why are you?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye. "Because she was seeing someone else while she was seeing me. Told him I was just a friend. Same line she gave you, I guess. I was her next backup in case her plans didn't work out." I stared at him for a long second. "You're saying she's been playing all of us?" Chris nodded. "She's good at it. But I figured maybe it's time someone else wins for once." He turned to leave, then stopped. "I'm not looking for anything. I just want her to stop ruining people." Mike and I stood on the porch long after Chris drove away. Finally, I looked at the flash drive in Mike's hand. "Think it's real?" "Only one way to find out." The next morning, we sat in my lawyer's office, her eyes scanning the contents of the drive on her computer. Halfway through, she sat back in her chair and gave a slow whistle. "This is gold," she said. "She committed bank fraud, asset manipulation, misuse of shared accounts." She looked up at me. "We've got her, Rick." And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and cold air conditioning. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my lawyer, a woman named Carla, who looked like she could cross-examine a freight train and win. Mike sat behind me in the first row, arms folded, silent and steady, like always. Jessica sat across the aisle, perfectly made up, wearing a pearl-colored blazer that looked like it cost more than our first car. Her expression was calm, controlled, But every now and then, I saw her jaw clench when she thought no one was watching. She was alone, no family, no friends, none of the men she had cycled through, just her and her lawyer, some polished guy with slick hair and a stack of binders that he didn't even bother to open during the first hour. The judge called things to order, and just like that, the fight I'd been dreading for weeks began. It didn't take long to see Jessica's strategy. Deny everything. Play the part of the blindsided wife. Accuse me of being controlling, of having trust issues, of being emotionally cold. Her voice even cracked once when she talked about losing herself in the marriage. But Carla didn't blink. She pulled out the flash drive and went piece by piece. Audio of Jessica talking about draining our savings, screenshots of secret accounts, records of her opening credit cards in both our names. And then came the kicker, an email to one of her friends, laying out her plan to bleed me dry before filing for divorce herself. The courtroom was dead silent as Carla read that one out loud. Jessica's lawyer asked for a recess. Denied. Jessica tried to interrupt. Overruled. The judge finally leaned forward, looked directly at her, and said, "Mrs. Spencer, if even half of this is true, your lucky criminal charges aren't being filed." That was the first time she flinched. By the end of the day, the ruling was clear. The prenup stood. Jessica was ordered to repay nearly $12,000 in unauthorized withdrawals and forfeited any claim to the house or retirement accounts. Her attempts to request spousal support were denied, due to willful financial misconduct, as the judge put it. When the gavel came down, I sat still for a second, trying to process it. Jessica stood up fast, face flushed and tight. She didn't look at me, just grabbed her bag and stormed out of the courtroom. As the door shut behind her, Carla leaned over. "That," she said, "was about as clean a win as you'll ever get in family court." I turned to Mike, who was already on his feet. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Better than I've been in months." We walked out into the sun, the weight on my chest lighter than it had been in a long time. Jessica had finally lost control of the money, the lies, the narrative. And for once, I had the truth on my side. The house felt different when I stepped back inside. Same furniture, same floors, same creaky hallway light that flickered every other second. But something had shifted. The air was quieter, still, like the place was finally breathing again after months of tension. I stood in the entryway for a long time, just listening. No heels tapping on the hardwood, no forced laughter from the kitchen, no whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Just peace. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in weeks. I didn't toss or turn. I didn't wake up in a cold sweat. I didn't dream. The next morning, I poured out the last of Jessica's almond creamer and tossed her favorite mug in the donation box. I boxed up everything she'd left behind: dresses, old books, a framed photo of us smiling on some long-forgotten vacation. It all went in the same pile, not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. Mike showed up with 2 cups of coffee and no judgment in his eyes. "Clearing out the ghosts, huh?" he said. Something like that. He helped me move the boxes into the garage. Afterward, we sat on the porch like old men, watching the street. I told him I was thinking about taking a road trip, somewhere quiet, somewhere I didn't have to think. "You earned it," he said. "Hell, take 2. Instead, I started with something smaller. I went fishing, alone, just me, a thermos, and a little lake 30 minutes outside of town. I didn't catch anything worth bragging about, but that wasn't the point. Back home, I started making the place mine again. I painted the living room, swapped out the bed sheets, took down the dusty wedding photos and put up pictures of hikes and barbecues and good days that had nothing to do with her. I started seeing old friends again, people I hadn't realized I'd pushed away over the years. We'd meet for lunch or shoot pool after work, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed without pretending. Mike and I fixed up the old shed out back. We turned it into a workspace, something I'd talked about doing for years. Jessica had always said it was unnecessary. Now, it felt like exactly the right time. One night, I found myself flipping through an old photo album. There was one picture of me from my 20s, full of life, eyes sharp, a crooked smile like I had something to prove. I stared at it a long time, and I realized something. I'd been chasing the idea of marriage so hard, I'd stopped chasing the version of myself that I actually liked. Now, I was going to find him again, one step at a time, without her, without the lies, just me and a future wide open. It was months before I even thought about dating again. Hell, I was still figuring out how to be alone without feeling like I'd lost something. The house was still empty, but the quiet didn't bother me anymore. It felt like freedom. I spent my weekends fishing, hiking, even getting back into old hobbies I'd neglected. Woodworking, photography. I didn't need to fill the space with noise or people. I just needed to get comfortable with the fact that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't living someone else's version of my life. But eventually, life has a way of nudging you forward. It happened one morning when I stopped at the local cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and a menu full of things I couldn't pronounce. I was only going in for coffee, but the place was packed, and I had to wait for a table. I glanced around. There were a few regulars. Old guys playing chess, moms with kids, a couple of people hunched over laptops. I was zoning out, watching the barista pour some elaborate latte art, when I heard a voice. "Do you mind if I sit here?" I looked up. She was standing at the table, holding a cup of coffee, eyes a little uncertain. There was something familiar about her, not her face, but the warmth, the kind that makes you feel like you've known someone for years. "Sure," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. I was just about to leave anyway. She smiled, but it wasn't forced, like she was genuinely enjoying the moment. "I didn't mean to intrude, but it's crazy in here this morning." I chuckled. "Yeah, it's one of those days." She sat down and we started talking. Casual stuff at first. She was new to town, a writer, originally from Portland. Her name was Leah. She was in the middle of a book project, and I found myself drawn in by the way she spoke about it. Like, her work wasn't just something she did, but something that defined her. I talked about the changes I'd been making in my life, about my bar, the road trip I'd taken, how I'd learned to embrace the quiet. "I think it's amazing," she said when I told her about the shed I'd turned into my workspace. "You know, there's something really powerful about building your own space after you've been through something hard." I didn't expect it, but her words hit me hard. She wasn't just talking about the shed or the house. She was talking about the rebuilding, the process of finding yourself again after all the pieces feel shattered. We talked for hours. By the time we parted ways, I knew I wasn't just walking away from a random conversation. Something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the connection we'd found, or maybe it was just the realization that life could still surprise you, even after all the pain. A week later, Leah texted me to see if I wanted to grab dinner. This time, I wasn't looking for answers or a distraction. I was just curious about her, curious about myself, about what the next chapter could hold. We met at a little Italian place downtown. The food wasn't the best I'd ever had, but the conversation flowed like it had picked up right where we'd left off. It was easy, natural, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. Not because I thought she was the answer to all the years of hurt, but because she was a reminder that I was still here, still capable of connection, of moving forward. As the night ended and we stood outside the restaurant, she gave me a simple smile. "I'm glad I asked to sit down," I grinned. "Me too." And just like that, I realized I wasn't ready to close the book on everything that had happened. But I was finally ready to start a new chapter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt good about it.